talked about some of the changes he was going to make at this Haskell location. The herd that Rodney was working with was a fall calving herd. Calves were born in mid-September to through November, and didn't really fit with the plans that they had for the cow production that Oklahoma State has across the state, and didn't fit with the other spring calving herds. So they decided to destock these cows here in this area for at least a year or two, and offered me the opportunity to do some stocker cattle research at this site. So I met with Earl and Rodney, Scott, and Brian Pugh, the area specialists in this area and the superintendent of this station, to look at what we could get done and where we could make the most impact for at least the short run. Like Alex Roccatelli had said, if we have the very best genetics, but we don't give them the very best nutrition, we're not going to get the productivity that you would expect. The base cow herd here was straight Angus, real nice set of cows, and they used a really nice set of bulls every year. They were born in the fall, so the calves were pre-weaning phase, going through short nutrition. The pastures here are a Bermuda grass tall fescue mix. So whenever you look on that table of data that I have, at 20 days after weaning, the heifers weighed right at 482, and the steers weighed 539, which is fairly respectable weaning weights for those types of animals, but they still didn't live up to the potential that we would expect for those types of animals. And that's true pretty well for this part of the state as we get into eastern Oklahoma, and I spent 21 years in Arkansas with a lot of Bermuda grass and a lot of fescue, and as we get into our higher rainfall areas, it just works that our grass is not as strong as it would be further west. So as far as nutrient quality, the Bermuda grass, tall fescue, it keeps plenty of protein, but fiber levels get up, it's not as digestible, and cattle just aren't as productive as they would be on grasses grown in a drier climate. So one of the things that I really intend to push and use as a focus of my program, especially in our more heavily cow-calf areas of the state, is looking at ways to add value to the calf crop. Part of that is the OQBN program. We can add value by having a certified health product for these animals where we know they're weaned, we know they've had their shots. Another way that we can add value to cow-calf production is through retained ownership post-weaning, especially on grass here where we can grow a lot of grass. How many of you here are predominantly cow-calf operations? Do you practice a lot of selection of your bulls and select your replacement heifers? You take pride in your genetics. The only way you can capture the value of those genetic selections you do is to keep those cattle post-weaning. If we look at a friend of mine, Stan Beavers, an economist that's based out of Texas, he says, a huge percent, 70 to 80% of the profit of a cow herd is based on having a live calf hit the ground. It doesn't matter what the genetics are. The only way we can capture the value of those genetics is to own those cattle later on. Here we have, it's a fairly nice set of steers and heifers that came from this herd. We had 63 of them weaned from this cow herd that we were able to use, and we put them on right at 100 acres of Bermuda grass here. Because of the way the pastures were situated, couldn't do a whole lot of supplementation work or grazing management work. So we decided to focus on using growth promoting technologies on these cattle post-weaning. One of the things that we've got as we are using Bermuda grass and grazing heavily, it's a lower growing forage. We've got a lot of rainfall in this area, so parasites are a bigger issue in eastern Oklahoma than they would be in western Oklahoma as we get into these higher rainfall areas. So one of the things we looked at was using a dewormer to control internal parasites and compare that to cattle that aren't dewormed. The other technology that we use that's probably the most cost-effective growth-promoting technology is implants. Unless we're capturing a large premium from an all-natural program, implants gives us the best return on investment of almost any product that we can use. So we have cattle here, steers and heifers, that were either implanted or not implanted. With the steers, we used the Synovex S, which is a product designed for steers. And for the heifers, we used a Synovex H, which is a product designed for heifers. When we look at heifers versus steers, heifers sell at quite a discount to steers. We perceive that they don't grow as fast and aren't as productive. They mature faster, especially once we get them into the feed yard. But the discounts get to be less as we own those cattle longer. When we sell those cattle at slaughter after finishing, there's no discount between steers and heifers. They are what they are at that point. But knowing the value difference in these cattle at weaning, because we don't expect them to gain as much as a stalker, I thought it was interesting that through the early part of the summer, from May into the middle of July, both steers and heifers gained right at 1.6 pounds a day. In the second period, from July until October the 3rd, we had a little bit of difference as far as numerically, but they still gained right at 1.2 pounds a day. So there was no difference in body weight gain on steers versus heifers. The other thing to notice is both steers and heifers responded to both the implants and the deworming equally. So we didn't see a difference in response whether those cattle were implanted, or steers or heifers, when they were implanted or dewormed. When we look at deworming, we allocated these cattle to 2 pastures that all the cattle were dewormed and 2 other pastures where all the cattle were not dewormed. The reason why we do this is so it doesn't mask the response of the dewormer, because we have shedding of parasite burden from undewormed cattle that would reinfect those cattle that were not dewormed. So because we only had 2 pastures of each, it's going to be hard to see a difference in the analysis, but early in the season, we numerically saw cattle that were not dewormed gain more than cattle that were dewormed. Can we explain that? I can't explain that, but I think we could say that early in the season, we didn't have as much of a nutrient restriction on those cattle, so they were able to consume enough quality nutrients to produce the gain that they were going to produce, and that the deworming was not a significant burden to their system. Later in the season, when our fescue was pretty well not growing and our Bermuda grass was getting more mature, we did see 0.3 of a pound benefit to deworming compared to not deworming. So overall, we did see a positive response to deworming whenever we go across the whole summer, which you would expect. The Also, this is a set of cattle that got dewormed. When we look at the cattle that did not get dewormed, these cattle are fairly well slicked off. We have a few with a little bit of red still, hair court, a little bit more less shedding than what you would expect for these cattle through the summer, but overall, they're fairly well slicked off. When we look at those cattle that did not get dewormed all summer, their hair shedding was not as pronounced. They're better than they were at the beginning, but we didn't see them slick off near as well, which would lead to a discount at the sale barn. Cattle coming out of tall fescue country, if they've got some rough hair coat, they will get a discount for that. Looking at the implants, whether they were steers or heifers, by the middle of the summer, we had right at a 21-pound heavier weight for those cattle that were implanted by July the 15th. And on October the 3rd, we had 30 pounds heavier body weight for those cattle. Looking at that, we had right at a 10% increase in gain for those cattle that were implanted versus those cattle that were not implanted. So, and when we look at, that tenth of a pound to 2/10 of a pound increase in gain, depending on when we evaluated that, that's about the response that we see when we have cattle out on wheat pasture that are gaining about 2 to 2.25 pounds a day. We'll see about a 10% increase in gain with those cattle, and they'll get a full 1/4 pound of gain a day benefit. Cattle on Bermuda grass or summer grass, they don't gain quite as much more, but we still see that increase in gain with those cattle that are implanted. On that first sheet that I gave you, it kind of goes over some of the results that we saw. These cattle, we had them on 19 to 20 acre fields. We had about 16 cattle per field on this, and so those cattle were understocked. And whenever we have cattle on Bermuda grass and the stocking rate's not quite high enough, the pasture will get ahead of them. We did not fertilize these pastures this year because we didn't have enough cattle to fully stock them anyway, and to keep it to where the forage quality was high enough for these cattle. Rodney mowed those cattle about monthly throughout the summer. He mowed them in May, June, August, September, and October. So to keep that forage to where it's, Bermuda grass, when it gets tall, it gets a lot of fiber, and cattle do not perform as well. So you either can keep it small and vegetative and high in quality through grazing management, or through mechanical management like Rodney did. The other issue that we have, Bermuda grass isn't, as nutrient dense as a lot of our pastures. So all these cattle, and you can see they really like this supplement. They were fed 4 pounds of a blend of soybean hulls and corn gluten feed every other day. So it was about 2 pounds of supplement a day, but they're only fed about 3 days a week. So, if we don't supplement those cattle, we would expect about a 1/2 pound of gain a day from that. So we have to feed a supplement to these cattle on Bermuda grass through the summer to get effective gains. The other issue we have in the humid southeast is flies, and we saw flies all across the state. We had heavy fly counts. Rodney did an excellent job of spraying the flies, putting back rubs out for fly control, and putting on fly tags, the silence fly tags. And even though with all that interventions on the flies, we still can count, significant fly load on some of these calves. So, it's not, we turn cattle out and we don't manage them and expect to get a good response. We've got to, manage those things, manage the parasites, manage the external and internal parasites, provide supplemental nutrients, and let's go ahead and use the growth promoting technologies that will give us a cost-effective performance.